And so the quest for the Platinum Trophy, my final achievement in Gran Turismo 7, continues. And this time around, because I missed a week technically to cover of course the new update last time, I've actually made a huge jump in the amount of races from last time to this time, so much so that I was initially thinking this series would probably be about 10 episodes long. It's actually going to be 5, and we're going to be done next week already, because up until last time I'd done 18 events out of the required 50. Well, now I've done 40, so it's come a long way since then. A ton of racing, in particular at Road Atlanta in Group 4 cars, and this time around, of course, I'm not going to get into the details of every single event, and it's not so much going to be on the theory side as I was the last couple of times in terms of talking about sport mode and the issues. It's more in just kind of a couple of weird happenings. I did have another victory. Incredible, I know. It only took 40 events to get back to having another victory. One right at the very end and one right at the start at Special Stage Route X in the first episode. And of course I've had a bunch more top 5 finishes as well. I think out of these 40 events I've had something like 11, I believe it was, top 5 finishes. So certainly not the higher end of the spectrum in terms of wins and podiums, but for me I'm fine with that, like 1 out of every 10 races or something like that. Now in terms of the actual categories, I have dropped in terms of the driver score, but my sportsmanship rating is still in category S. Of course it fluctuates up and down with penalties and such, but in particular I found that over the course of racing so many times at Road Atlanta, there seemed to be a whole lot of people who would make some kind of mistake, or in some cases quite intentional bad moves, wherein it would seemingly affect my score a lot more than it seemed to affect theirs. And there were also a couple of weird things that happened here and there. There was one occasion at Road Atlanta, and I'm not sure if I still have the footage for this one, but if I do have it then I'll include it here. But for some reason I got a minute penalty at the end of the race, and I'm not sure why. The only thing I can think of, because obviously there was no mandated pit in the Road Atlanta event, but the only thing I can think of is maybe there was some kind of yellow flag during the event, and sometimes the yellow flag seems a bit inconsistent in terms of whether or not it actually gives you a penalty. It seems to me like there's a little bit of a courtesy period, and I'm sure somebody can confirm this for me if it is true, between when it flashes up on screen and then if you still overtake someone in that first couple of seconds, like if you didn't have enough time to slow down, for example, and then if you do exceed that time and still overtake, then it penalises you for it. Now that could be wrong, but that seems to be the case. So the only thing I can think of is that I got that minute-long penalty because of something like that happening in the race. It only happened the once, and I've definitely had more than one yellow flag in different events, of course plenty of them, so it's weird to me that it only happened on that occasion, but that's the only thing I can think of. Nothing else really made any sense. If anyone else knows what that could be, then of course drop it in the comments, but for me that's all I could think of. Another weird one which happened, I think this happened once at Road Atlanta, and it definitely happened in one of the later Group 2 events. Actually a very fun event which I enjoyed quite a bit. I did it a couple of times. I did it in the Mercedes CLK LM and also in the McLaren Longtail, the F1 GT, of course the ones that I've got in the thumbnail, and this was one of the more recent ones from this week at the time of uploading, and that is of course the Deep Forest event. It's around a 25-minute one. You've got to pit in on racing soft tyres. So much fun. I actually was shocked by how much I enjoyed this one, even though it was that higher tier, higher, a lap time kind of competition with a lot of people on the grid. And of course plenty of opportunity for people to get a bit too close for comfort through the tight corners of Deep Forest, but for the most part I really enjoyed it, especially in the Mercedes. I found that a ton of people definitely went for the Merc. I couldn't really understand why nobody seemed that interested in the McLaren, so I tried out mine, and I pretty quickly noticed why nobody was interested. The balance of performance doesn't really favour the McLaren too much. It's quite twitchy and quite slippery, which I wouldn't usually think of that car as being, but the Mercedes is definitely way better with that balance of performance applied. I didn't try any of the other vehicles. Of course you could use the Super GTs, and there's even technically the Audi DTM car. I do prefer the older like GT1 style stuff anyway, so I went for that one predominantly. I'll probably include a little bit of the McLaren footage. That one I actually ended up just quitting. I think it was only the first couple of laps or so. I got spun out from somebody I think braking too late, and I thought, you know what, screw it, I'm not wasting the time to do this, so I just quit the event. And I also noticed, this seems a bit odd to me, but I would have thought a DNF, which of course is what that would be, would not count toward the 50 event completion, but it does, because there have been a couple of times where I've either had to quit a race because of an interruption, like a phone call or something, or just quit, like on that occasion, because I thought, well, there's no point in carrying on. Now obviously that's going to affect your sportsmanship, or at least I would think so. It still counted as a race completion, which seemed very odd, because it wasn't even like I'd done the majority of the race. I just quit, and then it seemed like once the race was finished, and everyone else had finished, then it still counted it towards the completion. That event was definitely the highlight for me. The other event, which was also great, because this is actually the event where I got a victory, was again the more recent one, the Stratos event, the Lancia Stratos event at Lake Louise. So of course, snow course, it was one of the, I want to say, shorter layouts, I think it was, if I recall correctly, and I had my second victory, but I also had the fastest lap and a clean race, so it was like the trifecta. And ironically, of course, in that event, it didn't give me any improvement whatsoever to the driver rating or the sportsmanship rating, because of course it didn't. It was only the race A. It was still a lot of fun though, I still really enjoyed it, and of course it gave me my second win of the whole thing. Seems appropriate that I would go from winning the first race to winning the 40th one with nothing in between apart from a few top fives, but that's just how it goes sometimes. And for this time around, one of the major changes which I have made, and you might notice this, not a single race this time around did I qualify for. In the first couple of episodes, I'd qualify here or there, and it made zero difference to where I started on the grid. It would always, and of course I talked about this before, and various other people weighed in with their thoughts, I would be placed at the bottom of the grid every single time. There was not a single lobby where I was placed high because of my lap time. So for whatever reason, however it is that they determine the best of worst qualifying times in any set group of people, I was always set in the lower end of that group. There was no group where my time was ever on the quicker end of that scale and then worked its way down. So I thought, well, if that's the way it's going to keep doing it, especially when you're like, 20 races in or whatever and it's still happening every time, well then why waste my time qualifying? I almost like the fact that it puts me at the back of the grid, because especially from a scoring perspective, like driver rating and stuff, starting from the back can actually be more beneficial, it seems, because you can climb so many positions and get all the benefit of that, rather than, for example, let's say I did qualify first, but then I didn't win. Well, that's not going to be great, surely, for the score. I think there is some benefit to that, and I also kind of like being an unknown quantity, wherein even I don't know how quick I am compared to everyone else. And at the end of the day, even with no qualifying time, on a couple of these events, I ended up being the fastest lap holder. I don't recall where the other one was. I know that I had the fastest lap, as I said, with the Stratos, and I actually just checked my notes because I've done a race report for every single event that I've done up until number 40 so far, and in race number 33, which again I did have the footage for, where I was driving the McLaren, I actually got the fastest lap in that one. I didn't win, but that was around a good run period. Up around the 30 to 40 race area, I had a load of really good runs, and it was weird because from race 20 or so to around race 30, I had a ton of really, really bad races. And of course that was part of the reason why I dropped from, what was it, B to I think C class in terms of the rating. I don't really care, because in the long run it's not like I'm ever going to be in the upper echelons anyway, so who really cares? It doesn't seem to have made too much of a difference to the kinds of races I end up in. There might be maybe one or two more people who do drive badly, but to be honest, I don't really see that much of a difference. Some people said that you would see a huge difference, and maybe it's just certain lobbies, but at least at Road Atlanta and Deep Forest and these other ones that I did, I can't say I really noticed that much of a discrepancy. In terms of penalties and stuff, well, I can't say what I really feel because I don't want the video to get demonetized because of language, but some of these events really, really bugged me, to say the very least. Some of them were absolute garbage, in particular when I was using the Audi TT. I found the TT to be quite a fun one with the front wheel drive chassis, quite a decent all-round platform as well. I never really used the Audi that much in previous games, but it was decent enough. The races themselves were hopeless though, and that was during that string of just really bad events, which of course caused me to drop down into C in the first place. But one of the other things which I noticed, and this one I believe was in the CLK LM run at Deep Forest, so one of the much, much later events. In fact, it was race number 38 out of 40, so only a couple of races ago. There was one person who I actually saved a screen grab of their gamer tag at the end. I'm not sure what happened here, but I'm pretty sure it was the same person, I think, who ended up having the overall quickest lap, but when I drove around this person or encountered them later on in the race, they were permanently ghost. Now, I don't know if that is some kind of hack or if that was a glitch, but they stayed on ghost permanently, and they were just driving through people and just, having a completely easy race because they could not be hit. That seems like a hack to me, but it also seems fairly blatant, and for people who are going to hack, why would you do that in sport mode? And also, how would you end up being in with a bunch of C-class people if you were that good of a hacker? So I'm not sure what was happening there, probably just a glitch rather than a hack, but it's the only time that I really noticed that happening. I think it may have happened earlier on, like I said, at Road Atlanta, but I don't recall that one. That time, definitely seemed like it was a more permanent fixture, and I believe it did allow them to get the quickest lap time during the event as well, if I recall correctly. And of course I was only ever doing this series to give me more motivation to get the 50 done anyway, so jumping from 18 to 40 without talking about every single race I don't think will bother anyone. This time around though was a very mixed bag. Some high highs, some low lows, some super annoying races, some incredibly bad penalties, and sometimes when people would full on intentionally just whack into my car. But I've reached a certain point now where it's like, is it even worth talking about? Because you guys already know what it's like, you've experienced it, we're all in the same boat, so who needs the details? You know exactly what this game can be like. The penalties are an absolute joke, sometimes just to an unbelievable level. I don't think any of the ones this time around, as much as they annoyed me as much as that one that I talked about, I think it was last time, or maybe in episode 2 at Dragon Trail, when I was in the Alpha 155 and got ricocheted by that GTR, which gave me the penalty for no apparent reason. That one was just probably the dumbest penalty of any of these races so far, but some of the others came pretty close. Overall, this time around I had a chance to try a ton of different cars, especially in Group 4. I slapped a ton of new liveries on them. I've got a ton of Group 3s to try out, probably next time more so. And of course, technically, there's only 10 events left to do, so I should easily be able to clear that out by roughly this time next week. This time next Friday, I probably will have the Platinum Trophy. Once again, thank you for joining me on the journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts, in particular on stuff like that ghosting issue, whether you think that's a hack or just a glitch, or if it's maybe even happened to you. I'd love to hear about it, because I, like I said, hadn't really seen it before. So definitely a mixed bag, but if nothing else, having another victory and a bunch of top 5 finishes, well, that in addition to a couple of clean races and a couple of best laps, I'll take it. For someone like me who isn't too concerned about being quickest around, clearly, sure, it's a better result than nothing. So I'll see you next time for the final episode already, episode 5, and for now, thanks for watching.